Welcome to the Radical Intimacies podcast series by Memefest. I'm Oliver Vodeb, a sociologist looking closely at design and communication, co-founder of Memefest, and editor and curator of the Radical Intimacies, Designing Non-Extractive Relationalities book. In this podcast, I will be in conversation with the authors who contributed to the book, many of whom I've known for years as collaborators and friends. The book was published in 2023 by independent academic publisher Intellect. The book explores resistance to capitalist domination through design, focusing on dialogue, power, land, interventions, and radical praxis. It presents the concept of radical intimacies, a relational way of designing that fosters closeness and decolonizes knowledge and the public sphere. In this series, we'll dive into these ideas, discussing and expanding them, and creating spaces for deep, meaningful exchange in the undercurrents. Let's see what happens. Hello, welcome to our next episode of our Radical Intimacies podcast, and I'm very happy to announce that today we're hosting Sam Burch and Kristy-Lee. Both live in Meganjin, which is also known as Brisbane, and both are longtime collaborators of Memefest, among many other things. Sam Burch has been collaborating with Memefest since 2013, and Kristy-Lee joined us a little bit later. And their collaboration was incredibly important as we've been working with Australian Aboriginal networks, groups on several different projects. And this, of course, was also, I think, important milestones in the history of Memefest, as the work with Aboriginal communities has added a crucial understanding for our work with Memefest and the collaborations that were significantly, importantly mediated by both Kristy-Lee and Sam Burch. They have profoundly, I think, influenced us all, the broader Memefest network, and also me personally. So the opportunity to speak to both of them comes because there is this beautiful chapter that Sam Burch wrote for the Radical Intimacies book titled Seeing Country, Decolonization, Timeless Intimacies, and the Escape from the Tyranny of the Dead Man's Vision. It's a chapter in the book that importantly brings in a explanation and a vision of the Aboriginal ontologies, worldviews, cultures, knowledge systems, how they can relate to the Memefest theories and practices, how they can relate to radical design. And both have been involved in one or the other way in making this chapter. So it's beautiful that today they're here. A few more words about them. Kristy-Lee is an artist and activist living in Jinibara country in the mountains outside of Meganjin, also known as Brisbane. She has been involved with First Nations and other aligned solidarity collectives for 15 years, including the Brisbane Aboriginal Sovereign Embassy, Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance, the Memefest Collective, and the Latin American Solidarity Network. With a background in theatre and performance, Kristy has concentrated her work at the intersection of performance art, resistance, and decolonization. Sam Burch is a writer, teacher, activist, and independent researcher whose interests include traditional knowledge systems and plant medicine, food sovereignty, and decolonial praxis. He has a PhD from the University of Queensland, has taught in creative writing, literary studies, and related fields at various institutions and elsewhere since 2008, has collaborated with Memefest Collective since 2013. He lives with his family in the mountains of Ginniburra country, southeast Queensland. I am very much inviting you to carefully listen to this podcast. I think it's very beautiful and important for our audience that is listening to our podcast to somehow get in touch with what is being said today. I wish you a great listening and see you soon. Good morning, how are you?
Well, thank you. How are you?
Well, it is beautiful to see you. I was very much looking forward to this conversation. The sun is shining here. How's the weather in your country?
On Ginniburra country.
Yes.
It is sunny, but it's winter sun, so the presence of light without an abundance of warmth.
Yeah.
We are experiencing more definition between seasons, aren't we? In our lived experience.
Yeah.
Actually having a winter in Brisbane or Magenjan is novel and new, but we're having it.
Wow.
Definitively colder than the last couple of years.
Yeah.
It hasn't really felt like a real winter here, in as much as I remember it,
Yeah. It's hard to imagine for me who lived there for 2.5 years that there's a proper winter. Well, not proper, but winter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a cyclone to boot, in recent months as well. So all bets are off in terms of what ecological state we're in, really.
Yeah.
If there's literally predictions about cyclones being increasingly common, this far inland, and so we just don't have the infrastructure that is prepared for that kind of thing.
Of course.
So it'll be really, really interesting to see what happens in the coming decades, I suppose.
Of course. I was this morning reading again the chapter Sam wrote, and I was remembering our time together, which is now quite some years. And I want to say at the start of this conversation that our friendship and collaboration were very important and in many ways highly influential and even formative to my work. And I was remembering it with, great fondness. And somehow I feel it's not really, although in terms of years, it's quite a while ago, but what we did then and the bonds we created and the knowledge that was created, somehow is very present. And I think that's, that's a very, very powerful thing. I'd like to also say that I'm speaking from Narm. And that I'm speaking from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And I would also like to say that I do pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. That recognition of where I stand, is something that I started to learn the value of it and the importance of it when I came to so-called Australia in 2011. And I lived in Brisbane, and I was walking through Musgrave Park because I worked at the Queensland College of Art there. And it was through Sam where I was then able to join some meetings of local Aboriginal people that were meeting around the fire regularly.
Yeah,
and,
that's the Brisbane Aboriginal Sovereign Embassy.
That's right.
Based in Musgrave Park. That's the colonial terminology, as so many place names on this continent have. But in terms of the purpose that the embassy had there was that it's a historical meeting place.
Yes.
Which is the place of the water in Yagara culture, and it had been and is a meeting place for 30 to 40,000 years. So it is, and you don't need to know what it is to recognize what it is.
Yes.
A lot of people find themselves drawn there, and I suppose you could call it quite a meta way, because it represents that thing. It resonates.
Yeah.
That purpose and that shared space. So, it is it's with the cooperation and grace of the Yagara people and community that all mob and international visitors can be there together.
Yeah.
And just to give people an idea of, to illustrate what the embassy sort of looked like in its inception and formation, it started as a fire.
Yes.
And as Chris said, it had been a traditional meeting place, discussion place for many, many thousands of years. And traditionally, the fire is not only a place of warmth and of meeting and of performing all of those functions that it does, but it's also represents an important place where you, to quote one of the elders that we met very early on with the embassy, that it burns away the old and brings in the new.
It's transformative.
Yes.
Not only in its elements, but in what that represents.
Yeah.
And so it was, in a sense, formed in a similar way to the Canberra embassy.
Coals from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tent embassy, for those who would be familiar with the history of First Nations resistance and assertion of cultural, spiritual rights, they would know that the Aboriginal embassy down in Canberra was established near Parliament House and was comprised of a tent embassy, essentially.
Yes.
So it was, that long history of moving towards representation and asserting those millennia-old rights and the sovereignty that that has become the way that it is understood in the movement as that sovereignty that was never ceded to the colonial powers, and in the absence of a formal treaty with First Nations people.
And also, and to quote elders, because that's where our knowledge and our sense of community comes from, is from them holding that ancient space, that sovereignty can be and is often misrepresented in the media. So the sovereignty that we experience and that we try to, educate around is one of inclusion.
Yes.
It's built on inclusivity and consensus. So it's a completely different way of operating and a way of being, in these heavily hyper-capitalized times.
Yeah.
And in contrast to that, sort of the way that it's often asserted in the sovereign citizen movements, for example, in the US.
Yes.
Sort of that anti-government assertion of, it's very much an individualistic sort of assertion of rights. And that's not to say that isn't important, but there's a much more of a collective.
Or that there isn't allyship from those spaces either. But this culture is a decentering of the cult of individuality, if you will.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I would like to say, our listeners come from different places, right? From around the world, and so the tent embassy in Canberra was set up in front of the Parliament House. This is, what
is Old Parliament House?
What is Old Parliament House? And it was the assertion of Aboriginal governance and voice, right, on Aboriginal land, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it had a kind of pragmatic, functional value, but also symbolic, obviously.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, an Old Parliament House is built on the sacred sites of the Ngambri people there.
Yeah.
So it's a layered reoccupation, if you will.
Yeah.
Churches all throughout the globe, actually, empire will capitalize, if you pardon the pun, on existing sites of Indigenous persons and often build Christian or governmental buildings on top of these sites because they existed
Yes.
in importance. So for the Ngambri and Ngunnawal, it was about, definitely a reoccupation. And I think that's really important to note that it was, not the first taking up of said space. 1948 was the first real movement towards, what we know now as Invasion Day. It was a day of mourning.
Yes.
Started in Nam or Wurundjeri country where you are now.
Yes.
And then the tent embassy was in the 70s and has had consecutive anniversaries commemorating the importance
Yes.
of the resistance there. It is an ongoing resistance.
Yes.
I know Brother Roxley was the firekeeper there for many, many years, ensuring that fire and the one that exists in the Maganjan embassy always burned strong.
Yes. We started the conversation kind of, I had this thought about Musgrave Park and where, as you would say, mob was meeting on country. Mm-hmm. Can I ask you to please tell us, how can we understand country?
Yeah, good question. I think it's really important to note, and this is a conversation that I've had with people in the environmental space for a long time, and in the climate movement, is that there's somehow, again, and it does come back to hypercapitalization and colonialism, where the city somehow escapes being defined as country.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
yes.
The environment, I'm not sort of discounting the importance of re-establishment of native grasses and all this sort of thing, but if you're seeing country, then the buildings and the cityscapes, you need to unimagine them in a way to see the pervasiveness and the truth of country. You can't allow colonial boundaries to exist and to permeate your subconscious and say, well, that's city. I've got to go out into the bush in order to be on country. No, you don't. Wherever you are is Aboriginal land.
Yes.
And so understanding where you are and whose country that was, and the changes that have occurred over the last, we're going on to 300 years soon. It can't be too far away. I think that first and foremost is really important to understand.
Yes.
Where you are is country. You don't live in a city. Yes, you do, but you also don't. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yes.
And also for those listening around the world or for those who are maybe not just familiar with the Australian context either, the majority of First Nations people here live in urban areas. And although, of course, the Aboriginal population has history all over the country,
yes.
To say now, to make a distinction between one part of it being somehow more authentically connected or more spiritually infused,
elevated any of that there. The forced migration of Aboriginal people through the mission system post-colonisation and post-invasion means that a lot of us are now found on the far west or far east coasts of the country.
Yes.
We are, of course, 500 individual nations. This is a really big continent.
Yes.
And the sheer size and breadth of it is difficult to understand or explain if you've not been here. But one sort of yardstick I can give the listeners is that when Sam and I commit to going to ceremony, to what we call country, even though we're standing on country now.
Yes.
When we say to our immediate family, we're going on country, we've got a ceremony. So for us, that means driving the distance from London to Moscow.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think it's fascinating.
So that gives you like a European yardstick to just Queensland.
That has to be said. Yeah, that has to be said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just so that people can sort of relate this back to their own experience as well, one of the things that has happened in previous years at the embassy itself on particularly important events or days or ceremonies, there have been a lot of course, First Nations people and a lot of non-First Nations people, of course, as well. And one of the elders at the embassy, when there is a ceremony to be performed, has said, well, okay, where's your mob from? Okay, are you from Europe? Are you from America? Are you from, are you from Asia? You know, and going... And each person would go to the direction that their origin point, you know, in terms of their connection to their country. So country is also the place of origin into which you are woven from birth. You might have a greater or lesser connection to it in terms of the natural environment there, the ecology of it. All First Nations peoples would say that their connection to country from birth and in the traditional sense is a complete interweaving of that person into their environment, because the environment and themselves are the same thing.
And there are comprehensive rituals, you know, in birthing on country that will tie a newborn to their place of origin. And that has been the way for millennia. Again, you know, and sadly, so many practices like that were forced away.
Yes.
During colonization, but they are being reclaimed. And the embassy itself stands for that reclamation after the grieving. You know, yes, we are all united in the truth that there was an invasion and that all of our countries and histories were impacted upon that. But it is necessary to attempt to continue to transform that grief.
Yes.
You know, via practice, whether it's creative practice, political practice. It's no more complex or simple than that, really.
And it's a connection and a reciprocity as well. And really that, if you talk about connection to country, wherever that may be as well, in terms of origin point, there is connection in a reciprocal way to the maintenance, the care of that place. And of course, that can also happen in the urban environment, as Kristy said. So care for country and community and people really encompasses the entirety of all of the connections that come for caring. Interconnectedness.
It's
at its core.
It's highly relational and interrelational and interdependent, right? And what I find incredibly important is that through the processes of, you know, initiations through one's lifetime, the response. So the more one gets initiated, the more responsibilities one gets. Right.
Absolutely.
I was just reading about, you know, again when I was reading your text, Sam. So that I think is. You know, it's something I would really like to discuss a little bit more, right? Because it's so counter to, you know, because the first impulse is the more one gets initiated, you know, there's power that comes with it, you know, or privileges. That, you know, that would be in colonial mindset, in a capitalist mindset, would be actually different, because the richer I am, you know, the richer one gets, the more property one gets, the more important one is, the less responsibilities there are, right? Well, here it is the opposite, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I can maybe try and explain again that in the context of what we're talking about, initiation can obviously take many different forms in many different cultures. Sometimes it's a spiritual initiation, and of course there are many different cultural practices of spiritual initiation.
Yes.
Or some other people might think of it as initiation into adulthood or initiation into relationship. But the way that we are also that I both described it in the chapter and through Kristy's story within that, her experience and the way we talk about it in ceremony, is that it not only represents a stage of life, of going from childhood, for example, into a form of adulthood and taking on various responsibilities, but it also implies that when you go through that initiation, something fundamentally changes about your knowledge of the nature of the world. And contrary to thinking of, particularly if we're talking in a spiritual sense, that you are told a story or a particular, you're given a certain type of knowledge about the way that the world around you, your environment works.
And your connection and responsibility to that.
Yes.
So with the name comes, a way of interacting in a relationship, which is defined as a moiety in the kinship system, which is just family.
Yeah.
And your extended family, your skin system. So that's one element. But Sam is of course exploring, how it is universally, I suppose, and by that I mean in the broadest sense possible.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that is important to realize about it is that something that happens to you during that ceremony as an experience, as a direct experience, will change the way you perceive reality.
Yes.
So you will see something directly, you will be shown something directly from which there is almost no disagreement. You can wonder about its origin, what it is, what it represents, but it's a definitive change in the way that you actually see reality. It's not a metaphor.
Yeah.
It's not a symbol.
Yeah.
There are symbolic elements.
Yes.
But you're fundamentally undergoing an experience that changes your relationship to the world. And in that sense, in the spiritual sense or the ceremonial sense, it means that the distinction between everything is spiritual. There is, from that, everything is sacred. You are on a path whereby you have experienced something, and that can be literally seeing a part of the spiritual universe into which you are being initiated, or that can be understanding the new pattern of relationships that you have, and relationships that you have in what I might, call a spiritual ecology. So
yes.
In exactly the same way that there is all of the elements that you experience in, or it can be understood from a scientific materialist perspective, that comprise an ecology, there is a parallel and completely infused spiritual ecology that contains,
much like a mycelium network.
That's right. Yeah.
So really, none of this is necessarily anti-scientific in understanding the natural world, the environment, as a way of seeing, as a way of knowing. No, not at all. But it's just recognizing that you are living also in a spiritual ecology that contains beings, forces, subtle elements that are as intricate and important and connected to country. That is the connection to country.
And in this sense, there is an unmasking. Because if, like myself, you are a dispossessed person, and my origin point is one of being removed from my original concept and being adopted, for people who don't know what I mean by that. So it's a literal dispossession, and then a returning to in my adult life.
Yes.
As I rediscover my background. And so I have been educated through predominantly a British system of education. I went to boarding school.
Yes.
So when I'm talking about an unmasking, it's requisite to see things with not with a colonial eye. And I was taught, thankfully, to be a critical thinker. I had a great education, but sometimes it is not for me to question. And that's been a difficult transformation, just speaking personally. Because, fortunately, again, I had what I would call a feminist-based education. I went to an all-girls school.
Yes.
They were heavily emphasize the advancement and education of women.
Yes.
So again, I critically think my way through my entire existence. But some things required me not to question.
Tell us more about that. Tell us more about that. What does that mean? How tell us more.
To quote an example, to go back to the chapter, there was a very literal experience out on Yalanga, and so this is a male initiatic site. So, and within the paradigms of that, there are obviously things that we can and cannot discuss. So, there was a main camp in which the women and children could occupy, and then quite a distance away, there is a camp for the initiates.
Yes.
And that, visitation is to those camps and between those camps is heavily regulated and supervised and only for ceremonial purposes. Would I, as a woman, go anywhere near that space, just to be very clear. But the sacred site that overlooks both of these camps is what we call the dingo site.
Yeah.
And in the dreaming, it is a very strong woman who ran from her country a great distance to what is colonially referred to as Cloncurry and transformed into a dingo.
Yeah.
That mountain, she is still very much in that mountain, and it's not legend, it's not story, but she transforms into a dingo so she can leave the mountain and oversee and protect what's going on in that very important site.
Yes.
And so there was part of me, in my re-education and my reclamation of culture, that I was like, the dreaming stories.
Yes.
Yes, there is law, there is lesson from this, but again, perhaps my colonial or westernized mind sees a storied element that somehow removed it from a literalness. I do know and see the dreaming as a way of understanding being of past, present, and future.
Yes.
Reflecting in upon each other. But again, there was still an element of that sort of remained in story for me until we were both sleeping, just on the dirt, just on a little mattress.
Yes.
Because it's too hot for anything else.
Yeah.
So we're talking between 45 and 48 degrees.
Yeah.
So in the desert.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of the Simpson Desert.
Celsius also.
Celsius, by the way.
Yeah.
For the uninitiated.
Yeah.
And my mattress, this is everyone's asleep. My mattress started to shake like someone was shaking my mattress.
Yes.
And I froze and said, Sam, do you hear that? Do you feel that? And he's like, out of slumber, like, no, what? What's going on? And I'm like, okay, never mind then, because instantly I knew that this is a dialogue between me and country.
Yes.
Sam did not feel the absolute abruptness and violence with which my mattress was being shook.
Yeah.
How is that? That is not physically possible.
Yeah.
Our mattresses were pushed together.
Yeah.
There's no way that he could not feel the reverberation of that contact, except he was prevented from doing so.
Yeah.
So I know now that that's just my yarn, that this is just time for me to listen to this place and not be frightened, be brave, and to not question in a way what I'm experiencing, to not dismiss it with a westernized or a logical mind saying that this is not scientifically and or physically possible, but to commit and to believe that this is happening and therefore be open to whatever country had to show me.
Yeah. What you're explaining is, and what you both have experienced, it's incredible. You mentioned, how far that is, how remote it is, how in some ways how extreme the nature is, the land is, the country is, and how
unforgiving in a way.
Unforgiving, but also how sacred it is, how
much knowledge it also took to navigate that and to survive there. Because if you don't know, and Kristy was sort of touching on the nature of story.
Yes.
In terms of the origin point of that sacred site, the totemic significance, the spiritual presence there, really encoded in all of the stories as well. Yeah. The literalness is there in a sense to also, it was the way people would survive.
Yes.
Would locate the necessities of survival.
Country would show them.
There's a pragmatic proof to these sorts of things, that it's like, well, if these stories don't have the pragmatic element of supporting 60,000 plus years of continuous cultural being and living on the land, then they're not. They are just, for want of a better word, fairy tale, mythology, or they have an unreal element to them.
Yeah.
And
that's deliberate within the colonial project, is to induce a sort of surrealist or abstraction of it.
Yeah,
of course.
And you can be seen as Wamba or like Demban, to use a Wurundjeri. No, actually, it might be Wurundjeri or Palawa term. Just means crazy. You can be seen as crazy.
For sure.
Trying to explain what happens in some of these contexts, these ancient contexts.
For sure, yeah.
But to tie back to the experience there, and this is also what I wanted to shed light on, I suppose, if I may, in this podcast, is the next morning there were tracks going to and from my mattress. So I followed the tracks.
Yes.
And looked up at the dingo site, and I had looked at it for days. I'd been there for days.
Yeah.
And I'd seen but not seen. So when I followed the tracks and looked up, I was able to see a perfectly formed female face.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah, right. So you're there. That's you, and you're there. And I'm supposed to know now. So I took a photo and I took it back to camp and said, this is what happened to me last night.
Yeah.
And this is what I've seen in the mountain. And some of the elders there who had told me the yarn of the place and the reason why it's consistently revisited and so sacred had not seen her face. I'll send you the photo so you can perhaps, maybe put a visual cue in whatever link, but it's as plain as the nose on my face.
Yeah.
So,
it was interesting as well. I as Kristy said, I didn't feel the event that she described, but earlier in that evening I had heard the call, and that I identified as that being, and we could talk. Kristy and I both have quite a long history of these sort of experiences that over time they make no doubt in your mind that what you are experiencing is the reality that you're inhabiting. And of course in a longer cultural context of initiation as well, these experiences would build over time and become more deeper and more certain.
Yes.
And really coloniality ruptures that experience, and it also leads to, I think, one part of the thing that I sort of described in the chapter as well, that there are many parallels, of course, in so many different cultural contexts, European ones included, where natural features are the domain of spirits, or are the restic giants, or they are, these creation figures. But in a colonial mindset, especially, the origin points, as Kristy said as well, are they're oppressed and forgotten.
Yeah.
And really it's a forgetting of those origin points that way of being and relating to that world.
Yeah.
That in a sense it also you have to have that in order to maintain a colonial or a capitalist project.
That's right.
have to strip country of its value. You have to strip it of its sacredness and its connection.
Yeah, and then to further that, you take its people away from it, the people who understood it and who could speak it.
For sure.
You know, and the language that came from that place. And that brings us back to how we met, really, which was the inception of the Grandmothers Against Removals, which was to, you know, bring education to the settler colonial population that Aboriginal children are still being removed at alarming rates.
Yes.
You know, post-apology, post the apparent conclusion of that period of history, you know, and sometimes in dramatic circumstances, at gunpoint, you know, at birth, at hospitals.
Yes.
You know, colonial project is really brutal.
We should,
you know,
we should say that there's a wrong conception which I also had before I learned differently, that the forced child removal is a thing of the past. Right? So that's shockingly not true, because right now, in this recent years, in recent history, as we know, as we researched when we were working together, more children have been removed than in the times in the 1970s, right? For example.
Right.
So it's an ongoing colonial genocidal project that is still happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in
one of the most effective tools is to separate people from their context and from their origin point.
Yeah.
And to have them raised out of that context very deliberately.
Yes.
Through mission systems, language was prohibited. I know in Turtle Island, the cutting of hair was mandatory.
Yeah.
Similar here.
Yeah.
And also, this is not isolated to the indigenous populations of the Southern Hemisphere. There's a indigenous Greenland mother who's fighting the Danish government at the moment for her child.
Yes.
So it's happening in native and indigenous communities across the globe.
That's right.
Because it is one of the most effective tools of the colonial project.
Yes.
Is to basically, because we were such cohesive families and communities.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you hit someone where it means the most to them, and that is connection to people and place.
Of course. The beauty of the far remote country somehow gets, you know, destroyed, disturbed, and the songline gets cut. And I would like us to talk about mining. I would like us to talk about what this does to country, and especially considering that you know, Australia is one of the economically wealthiest countries in the world, and its prime economy is extraction extracting of natural resources. Right. And while you were explaining how you were participating in a ceremony, in a ritual, right? So important, so deep, so ancient, so sacred. At the same time, you know, you have this happening not far away, right? You were talking even about an area in the text, but it's happening in various parts of Australia. How can you please help us, you know, and our listeners understand how damaging that is, and how does Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal people, how do they think about that, about this fact?
Oh, I mean, the cost is so real. It's so human. And I know, like, it's, you know, especially since the 1980s, the successive neoliberal policies have sped up the way that resources are extracted from Aboriginal land all over this continent.
Yeah.
And I've seen the very real impact on the people who are connected and responsible for that site. They too experience a loss of quality of life, and there is a physical deterioration that goes along with the destruction of the site.
Yes.
And so, connectedly speaking, the dingo site that I referenced previously, when the spirit of that place got to that place, she gave birth to a dingo pup, and that pup is part of the story and why boys are continuously initiated on that site, because of the birthing and the transformative nature of the site.
Yes.
But the pup site, whilst we were there, had almost entirely been destroyed.
Yes.
And and you cannot say that these councils, that these companies are ignorant of the consequence of the place, of its importance. They are not.
Yeah.
But they do it anyway.
Yeah.
And it's only in recent history that these conglomerates are being held accountable for their willful destruction, i.e. Rio Tinto and Juukan Gorge, and the damages that they've been ordered to pay, which, by the way, is a currency that is incompatible to what has been taken. You can't denote any amount of actual money that would repay or cover the loss of culture and the loss to people there.
Yeah.
Like, there isn't a dollar amount that makes it okay. It's not. There isn't. Because it's two different languages. The language of money, it doesn't compute.
Absolutely. And that dingo pup site, so you can actually see that from the side of the road. It's near a whole bunch of sort of demountable, well, at the time, when we were visible, sort of demountable units connected to the mining company. As far as we could tell, the rail freight company that uses, that services a lot of the mining industry, Horizon, was the last to lease that particular site, and was obviously in part responsible for what was happening there. As Kristy said, we're absolutely certain that the authorities that be there knew that the site was sacred.
Yes.
They went ahead with, or allowed its destruction anyway. And for both of us, and when I was also trying to conceive of telling that story as well, what the destruction of that site represented, there was this parallel between the removal of children and the destruction of those relationships.
Literally.
And there was the literal destruction of the dingo mother's pup that was happening at the same time.
Yes.
So tying those sorts of two things together and saying that, and I'm only echoing what the position is, being that the land and its peoples are inextricably linked and the same thing. So one form of colonial separation of children from families, and from parents and from community, when you remove people from land and you also destroy sites that themselves. I mean, the Juukan Gorge site is one that's very well known, that was destroyed by Rio Tinto.
Yes.
Eventually, after a lot of publicity, there was a very large compensation that was given. But as Kristy said, there's no, and the elders of that site said, there's no way of compensating for the languages that were spoken in that place.
Yeah.
For what it has.
Exactly. The spiritual connections.
Yeah.
Everything that it, being almost a birthing site of generations of languages, of connections, teaching everything. And so you destroy the site and the country, and you're destroying that same thing.
But the conglomerate will not understand that what was lost or taken was more valuable than whatever was extracted. Again, there's an incompatibility in terms of the language being spoken.
Yes.
And one of the infuriating things that has happened in terms of this relationship to mining from its very inception, and this happens all over the world with First Nations communities as well, is that because of the lack of agreement, the lack of consent, there is arguably also in this country, there's not only a divide and conquer strategy used by mining conglomerates to divide communities
and families
with monetary compensation or consent to mine or extract from these areas, but there's also a complete inconsistency in terms of the compensation that is then given back to communities.
Yeah.
Now, the mining industry would also then say, "Oh, look, there's
we
plenty
fulfilled
of
our debt. We 20,000 here, 30,000 there. It's nothing.
Of course.
What they are taking.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
of
is
course.
chump change.
Yeah.
And the other thing I also mentioned in the chapter, because there's along with the stolen generations that are ongoing.
Yeah.
There's also the ongoing, I guess, condition of stolen wages that was a very prominent feature of colonial employment.
Yes.
From particularly in the 50s onwards,
Yes.
is that the colonial and governmental system would continually move the goalposts for First Nations people and say, well, look, you have to be involved with this capitalist economic system. And then when mob was forced to do that, the goalposts would be shifted again, and that was legitimately supposed to go to people as part of that contract was not paid in rations or that contract.
Or not at all.
Yeah.
So, and that happens in a legal sense as well. The goalposts are continually moved in terms of what is necessary to be done to actually enter into an equitable relationship. And that is the great fear of treaty as well. Any colonial power is that you have to enter into an agreement.
Or a dialogue, let alone an agreement. It's just about dialogue at this point.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because we live in an anti-dialogic culture, right? A culture that actually destroys dialogue and tries to basically, not erase it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, knowledge is such an important part, of what we're discussing, and the destruction of knowledge, and then rediscovering the knowledge, maintaining it, and finding ways for, wisdom and knowledge to be communicated to the younger generations, to the current generations. And a lot of the times when we discuss this, or I discuss this in other contexts, there is, there's almost always this idea that if we, let's say, decolonize knowledge, there has to be a shift, a onto-epistemic shift in getting away from Western conceptions, right, of the world. Right? Now, I understand this, and this is, I understand this, but and here I'd like to complicate a little bit, because that's also, Sam, you were complicating that in your text, right? So my question would be, which is more of a rhetorical question, but still, is everything that comes from the West bad?
Stunned silence from the crowd.
Stunned silence.
No. You're right.
I think, look, let me just preface that too with saying, I was born overseas.
Yes.
I came very, with my parents when I was 6 months old. I had, I guess, feelings that drew me towards in my teens, and then in my early 20s, what I wanted to pursue experientially, and that eventually came to be, that was a spiritual path, a philosophical path, and a creative path as well. But I guess it eventually came to be that feeling of how I could live properly here and in proper relationship. And I'm, honestly forever grateful to country here for everything shown and given me. And I hope in a sense that I always try and honor that relationship as best I can in my life and my practice and my relationships. But I think the way of being, like you said, it's an ontological epistemic thing.
Yes.
And when we say Western, I mean, what are we talking? Are we talking philosophically, or in terms of historically? Because as we said, that in the Western or the European or in these other forms of traditional knowledge and spirituality, there's many parallels to First Nations knowledge here, and also. It's just with a particular type, I guess, of philosophical, sociological frameworks that support the hegemon, for one of the hegemonic systems.
Yes.
That allow, and those value systems. And I guess also, if you're thinking about. Personally, for me, a lot of things has been stripping away knowledge to allow particular types of experience. It's not about an accumulation of things. It's learning that an accumulation in, again, that sort of consumptive or capitalist way that you might accrue your possessions or value. It's a stripping away. And really directly experience, an attempt to directly experience and navigate those complex and millennia-old knowledge systems. And really, for me, that in my experience had to come from just doing my part and my best to form proper relationships with, First Nations people here, and to just experience that at its most formative, at its most basic level first, of just friendship and involvement and community levels. So, I mean, that's a kind of a tangential in a way to it's all Western knowledge bad. No, it just needs. Of course not. There are just certain. I mean, like it's like pointing to Cartesian dualism and saying, well,
of course.
Point, a mind-body split or what have you. Absolutely not. They are all dialogues that speak to each other. And if we're talking about dialogic understanding, we just need to understand how these different knowledge systems are talking to each other, because none of them are, none of their expressions are, in a sense, absolutely pristine or out of the context in which we're living. We just better need to understand exactly how they're talking to each other. You can't just learn. There was a quote, from the book that I quoted in the chapter, The Dead Man Dance, by the very the wonderful Noongar author Kim Scott. That one of the laments of the central character in there was that we learned your language, but you didn't want to learn ours.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, it's simply that. Just, there is no basis for relationship unless there's the reciprocity.
Where there is an inherent incompatibility in my mind is that when this continent was invaded, it was invaded with a class system that was superimposed on top of it. That was completely foreign. So the thing that is incompatible with Western society, and that society within itself has its revolutionary figures, Marx, Guevara, etc., who are trying to dismantle class, but that is where we are inherently incompatible. There were spaces which you occupied in society, but they weren't class-based. They weren't hierarchical in nature, not in the way that say British society was, because we're talking about the colonization of this country in particular. So, now First Nations resistance has an intersection with class-based struggle.
Of course.
Workers.
Of course.
And
it has to have,
the melting pot of resistance as we know it today. And it's a longer talking point as to whether Marx could have benefited from a decolonial thinking. That's a podcast for another day.
And It is, and you would know from everything that you've been doing over the years as well, Oliver, in terms of relationship to university and knowledge production, all of that sort of thing. You know, the knowledge itself, or the theories, or the philosophy, or the concepts, or what is not the negative thing in and of itself. It's the systems around it, the hierarchies, the gatekeeping, the economy involved in that knowledge as well.
I am asking myself regularly, you know, is it possible to do meaningful work within the university, you know, Western neoliberal managerial university context? And it's a constant struggle to maintain conditions and a position within myself to be able to do this. And I do think, our collaboration has, to me, proven again and again that collaborating and having close relationships with the networks that are such as yours are crucial to empower people who are still within those structures, within the university, making a huge effort to try to still guard the knowledge, right? From the forces of destruction, which are permanent and increasing. I was yesterday receiving a message from a colleague, a professor in sociology at Macquarie University, saying that basically they are about to close down, so basically erase completely sociology and politics. And she said that she can't think of a time in the recent history where sociology and politics would be more important to teach at the university. Absolutely. Right? And that is exactly the same logic that you were explaining before, right? That certain types of knowledges have to be pushed out, destroyed, because they are capable of empowering and doing things in the world that are countering the powers.
Well, to quote an incredible trans activist / comedian that Sam and I went and saw recently, Oliver Vodeb, my apologies to them if I got their name wrong. But in seeing that and experiencing their lived experience, if I could say one thing to students that are listening to this, it's a question, I think, of switching the talking point, because you're at university, the focus is on what you are learning. But may I suggest that simultaneously you are unlearning?
Of course.
So literally a talking point, asking each other, what have you unlearned today?
Absolutely.
What you have learned today? What did you see staring you in the face and you went, that is not going to be relevant to my personal practice. I am not integrating that into my practice as a designer.
Absolutely,
into my politics, into my life as a mother or a father.
And I think the critical approach, and being just very aware as much as you can of how is the knowledge that is being presented or transmitted, is there an agenda to commodify it in a particular way?
Right.
Is it teleological in terms of going towards a career path or a particular end goal? And how is the university system itself doing that? And when, we've referenced a number of times this article by Tuck and Yang, the scholars, Decolonization is not a metaphor.
Yes.
That addresses this sort of trend within a lot of universities. And it's not all negative, but it has to be approached critically, that decolonization can become a trend word for decolonizing something that is not based on actually giving land and authority and rights back to the colonized.
And it's too important to tokenize.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, really within, and Meme Fest, of course, is one of those wonderful examples, I think, of the emphasis of practical engagement engagement. You really of just testing knowledge, of grounding it in lived experience, in grounding it in resistance, and the production of things of media or interactions, relationships that challenge the environment. And I think that we know so many wonderfully talented young people, and also academics that are First Nations within the university system that make tremendous work. Producing tremendous perspectives, and from that, still within that system. So it is possible to just critically think about, resist, engage with everything that you're being presented with.
And also there's, I suppose, an unspoken decree almost on what that has to look like. What resistance has to look like. Are you resisting if you're not on the front line, if you're not highly visible as a media spokesperson? There are a myriad of ways to resist, opposition to this type of dominance that we see happening in our tertiary institutions. Now, to go back to Meanfest, it was just people in a room. But that has the opportunity and the potential to change lives, to change communities, because that one person in that room goes back to their dinner table where their friends and family sit, and they start to explore things and have different types of dialogue. So, you should be forgiven, for thinking that you're not doing enough or that it's too hard. Of course, we're all going to have moments and phases where resistance is exhausting. Because the oppression and the gatekeeping, it doesn't stop. It doesn't take a day off. But we as people need to.
That's right. Yes.
And I think, within that, really also removing that hierarchy within the individual that says this work is inherently more valuable than something else, and universities are very good at that too, as a whole bunch of, within the society that we live in, this work is more valuable, or this contribution is more
funded
valuable.
more, it's prioritized.
Of course. Absolutely,
People, those interactions that we had, in the Grandmothers Against Removal, Radical Intimacies event with Meanfest as well.
That was great.
And really, people remembering that any form of community interaction, relationship, is of just as much value as any other theory that you can pursue in a scholarly sense.
Absolutely.
Invisibility, some of the most, First Nations women and women of colour everywhere, are some of the most completely marginalised, invisible, or made invisible in these, society, in colonial and others and every society, frankly. But every act that is performed by those women and others is just as important in holding together families and communities and lives and resistance. Everything is an act of resistance against being made invisible.
So, you ended your sentence with invisible, right? And then, made invisible. And then, Kristy, you were at the start saying some, I thought it was fantastic, like the city. Here's the city, right? But you don't see it as country. Right? So again, you were talking about, how we can see, right, things or unsee. And then, Sam, you were writing about seeing country, right? Seeing country. And in there, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. You were talking about a sensory experience, a visionary experience, right? In relation to seeing country, right? And that, can you both tell us more about that? Because that could be something as we we did such a great round, right? For us to better understand, what that means, and how can we try? How can people try to think about that, and potentially even, engage with that idea, right?
Yeah, well, on a very basic level, and going back to the re-examining of a metropolis as country and as Aboriginal land.
Yeah.
If we're talking about our relationship to it, then, all right, let's give a very literal example that perhaps students on Wurundjeri country can take.
Yes.
So Smith Street is a very famous street.
Yes.
In the northern suburbs of Naarm, there on Wurundjeri country. Now, every Aboriginal person that gathers on Smith Street has more or less come the long way around to being there. And when they occupy space, which they have every right to do, the everyday press of society and of capitalism can frame them as an inconvenience, or as not appropriate to the landscape. So in seeing country, you can see the people, and that will inform how you see country.
Right.
So it's just that shift. No, they're not an inconvenience, and no, their gathering isn't a threat to you. It's not going to undermine you as an individual or your day in any way. But they gather there, for a sense of community, and their appearance can sometimes be a barrier to people, I think. So they are invisibilized or disappeared.
Yes.
Within that landscape, despite being people of the land. So, I would start with how you see people. If you see people, you will see country. I guarantee you. For example, my son and I, when we were participating in the school marches for climate, got together and we decided, how can we best represent our family and our mob in the discussion around ecological damage via colonization? And we decided to create a poster with Archie Roach lyrics, which said, if you heal the people, you'll heal the land. It goes hand in hand. So you don't need to have an esoteric, mind-blowing, shift from reading whatever or doing whatever. Just see Aboriginal people in the context that they are, which is often dispossessed or marginalised. And then you'll have a much easier time seeing country.
And absolutely. And I guess practically for me, I sort of mentioned that part of the path I'd sort of walked from, my late teens, early 20s, had that sort of primarily spiritual orientation, that I was seeking direct experience of things. I was seeking visionary experiences or phenomenological experiences of the natural environment. And, as well as having experienced that and been invited kind of through that initiation into the spiritual universe of First Nations people here. I've also been a student, I guess, and a practitioner of Sufism for nearly 2 decades now as well. And a part of a central kind of idea of that practice and perspective is about the removal of veils. And really that every person has, to a greater or lesser degree, the capacity within their being, within their soul, and within their sensory experiences in this body to see things differently. And like I said, that's not an addition of knowledge. That's the removal of a veil. And removing those veils And those veils can come down in any number of ways and are in fact the accretion of living in a colonial system, or in a particular societal context.
Yes.
Tells you, well, you need to be looking and seeing these things as as the most valuable. You should be pursuing this, you should be pursuing this goal or this product or this lifestyle or something over another thing. Though that's the way that those veils gradually from birth come down over a person.
Yeah.
But really, capacity to see differently is always there, and can be pursued exactly like Kristy said, through just those direct, the interaction is the most important recognition.
And I don't think I'm oversimplifying it. It is simple. It really is. It starts at a simple, pure place, and then the ripples expand, and that allows for further perception changes or perception shifts or veil removal, unmasking, etc. Till when you can sort of understand that it's a complicated place to exist authentically. This continent.
Yeah,
it is.
And I just like to note also that when I say seeing, or when we talk about seeing as well, we're not actually just talking about vision. Seeing encompasses is a perceptual thing. It's listening.
Mm-hmm.
Listening and experiencing and feeling deeply within whatever faculty, wherever you choose to locate that faculty according to your your system. But it's the totality of the experience, and that is also an imaginative experience as well, not in a fantastical way, but in the way that the dreaming would to use that sometimes the term, but the way that
And in those stories, the most consistent theme is the decentering of individualization. Understanding yourself as a part of something greater.
Yes.
Something bigger. Not the most important thing that's walking about.
Yes. Yeah, I understand the broader concept of seeing. Thanks. I do think seeing, though, is a great word to use in our, vision and visually centric culture. Right, so that's fantastic, and I guess as with everything else, we're being instructed, by colonialism and capitalism how to see. So to see things differently, that's one of our aims. I'd like to thank you. Like I feel, as I said the other time, well, we could do 10 times more, right? And then we would say, well, when are we meeting again, right? So that was wonderful, and I feel really happy and honored to have you both here.
Thank you for having us.
Very glad to have spoken, and to talk and to look forward to talking again.
And also thank you for for platforming the reality of this country with neoliberal extractivism. Affecting so many nations. As I said earlier, we are 500 in total.
Yes.
And not one is absent from this discussion. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Kristy. I think it's incredibly important for our listeners, to hear this podcast. So thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day, hey?
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Memefest, an intellect publisher of original thinking. It is a celebration of our collaboration and Intellect's 40th anniversary. The podcast is produced in Naarm, also known by its colonial name Melbourne. We would like to pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. The music at the start and end of each episode is by the band Bait from Boona in Victoria, with members Michael McGuinness and Malachi Doyle. You can find them on Bandcamp. Check them out. Thanks. Until our next episode, take care.